Hi, and welcome to episode 24 of Privacy Laws, where I, Donata Strang-Skilbert, speak with amazing privacy professionals, and we have some laughs along the way as well. Today, I'll be speaking with privacy attorney Angeli Patel about the risks of uploading personal photos into AI tools. Angeli is an attorney focused on AI, sustainability, and corporate risk. She's the executive director of the Berkeley Center for Law and Business. Previously, she was an advisor to the White House Office of Management and Budget under the Obama administration and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So, Angeli, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. And I still can't get over the privacy laws. It is indeed very funny.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Berkeley's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Council and your role on the council?
Like any major bureaucracy, as you can tell from my background, that's primarily where I've spent most of my time is in large organizations. Berkeley itself is a very, very big place. It's known to be one of the most innovative schools on the planet. It puts out the largest number of startups every year in the country, for sure. I'd argue in the world as well. And so what that takes sometimes is coordinating resources in such a large place like that. It's nearly impossible. Every engineering school, law school, business school has founders. They have pots of money where founders can use, researchers can use. There are resources scattered all throughout the school. And so the role of the Innovation Entrepreneurship Council is to really aggregate and find a way to connect students and researchers to opportunities to innovate. Whether that's that they need legal help in incorporating, whether that's they need business help in taking an idea to market, any number of, if they need space, if they need mentors, the INE Council essentially helps be that resource for anyone who's trying to innovate on campus. It's for students and researchers at Berkeley. So my role is representing the law school. And at Berkeley Law, we're one of the largest schools for tech and privacy. And a lot of our students also focus on becoming lawyers who support the startup ecosystem. And so the law school also plays that role on campus for Berkeley innovators as well. And so I kind of play the multi-hat role of both being a resource myself, the Berkeley Center for Law and Business being a resource for startup founders, but also the larger law school.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I wish I had that when I was in school because there was nothing similar. And then when I decided to start this business, it was like, okay, well, do you go to SCORE? Do you try to like find different resources online? And, it's hard. It's hard to know who to trust or what's the right information.
Yeah.
So having that right at your school must be really nice.
Well, it's very nice, but it's also almost necessary just given the
Yeah.
size of the school itself. And I think, it's not a perfect solution, but it's definitely one of the better ones. What it does also is it helps a lot of lawyers actually start to think innovatively. So a
Mhm.
lot of law students themselves want to join the world of entrepreneurship and being kind of plugged into the larger campus community where there aren't just lawyers everywhere, it
Yeah.
really, really helps. It's very, very, what do you call it? Cross-pollinating. That's the word.
That's awesome. Cool. You recently wrote an article about protecting the rule of law as attorneys. Can you tell us a little bit more about, why doing that is so important?
Yeah, as you can tell, I am working on a lot of different topic areas as part of my both my role, but also my personal interest. And more recently with all the things that we're seeing in the news around judicial officer safety to generally any third party, if you would, into how the law is practiced or how justice is administered. At least for me, it's, I think we should all kind of take a moment to think about it and reflect on what that means to us as individual attorneys. I think we live in a time where our institutions are, for better or worse, kind of going through it.
Mhm.
And it's a time for a lot of attorneys as folks who interact with legal institutions and are in some ways part of those institutions to really think about your individual role in what you believe in that institution or whether that's the rule of law generally. And I think for me, what that means is, and the reason I wrote that article was like, it was in order to kind of nudge us to all identify what our moral North Star really is individually. I think there's a lot of organizations we are part of, a lot of bar committees, a lot of political parties, a lot of schools, and there's so many ways to identify as a person, but ultimately you're the one who's practicing and you're the one who has to make judgment calls. And I think coming up with your own version of what it means to protect the rule of law, what it means to be in a democratic society for you is something that we should all take time to like write down somewhere on a piece of paper and say like, here are my red lines, here are my boundaries, here are my commitments. And so that's kind of why I wrote it. For me, what that means is, it's always meant that you know, using law in a way that, continues to create, and at least I'm a corporate lawyer, I'm a privacy attorney, I work on tech and tech matters. So I don't have the opportunity to go in front of a judge as often as maybe a lot of other or litigating counterparts might. But for me, what that looks like is ensuring that, where there are loopholes or there are gray areas, we tend to trend in the direction of accountability, transparency, whether that's in governance, whether that's in contracts and transactions, making sure every party there's good faith where there is good faith. I think there's a sport a lot of times to being a business attorney, and it's really fun. But I think that there are lots of different places where we can practice what our moral boundaries are. So, the article really is just about do your reflection, figure out what it means to you in your practice, what it means to be an attorney that values the rule of law.
It's interesting because so many attorneys who, like myself, I don't go in front of a court and I don't practice traditionally either. So for me, like I've been a part of the American Bar Association's Rule of Law Initiative for many years now. And initially it was focused on the rule of law abroad. And it seems like it's focusing a lot more on domestic rule of law. So being part of those groups as well is a big way to further that, even if you're not going in front of judges or you're not practicing traditionally either.
I'd even say for so many, corporate attorneys specifically, if you're advising companies, I think there's a lot of really great ways. I think a big part of modern corporate practice is, encouraging companies to have a more proactive stance on regulation or having more proactive stances with engaging with government. And I think those are the areas where you can be like, all right, this is where the rubber meets the road and we can start developing like best practices and, the rules of the game that don't skew public and government power in a way that unfairly it's benefiting maybe one company or one industry. So I think there are like small places where that can come into practice. But yeah, I agree. It is rare.
So we'll talk about the risks, the privacy risks of uploading your own photos into AI. But before we get into that, I was just kind of curious, do you use AI in your personal life, like outside of work and outside of your community work that you do, but just in your personal life? And how do you use it in your personal life?
Oh my goodness. I use it probably more than most people. So I use it in a number of places. I have my journaling AI that I use, which is called Mandala. It lives in Slack, and it's basically kind of is like a personal coach that walks me through like, I'm having a bad day. I'm really mad at this person. What do I do? And it like coaches me through difficult situations. So I have like my mental health leadership coach AI. I have my multiple use cases for ChatGPT on here's what's in my fridge. What should I cook? To, I see something walking on the road and I want to know what it is, to any number of those kinds of interactions with ChatGPT. I absolutely love all of my note taker and my voice recording AIs. So I can talk to it and it can transcribe my thoughts and give me insights. So yes, I do use AI quite a bit. I also really enjoy using the AI features that existing kind of things that I use have, like Canva, for example. I use Canva a lot for designing a number of things, and their AI feature to generate a new image you might need, or a new way to configure a template. So I know it's kind of everywhere. Now that you've asked this question, I'm like, where else do I use this? I also use it in my Aura ring. So I have wearables, and I'm clearly a very tracked and measured person, but Aura has like an AI advisor and it gives you insights into your health. So yes, is the answer. I use it a lot.
I haven't even thought of like half of those uses because usually I'll do so I'm Lithuanian. So if I need to like translate a certain like more complicated concept into Lithuanian, I might use AI for that. Or I may use it to like write notes to family members on like greeting cards when I can't think of what to say apart from like happy birthday. But that's really it. I did not using it to like plan your meals is really smart because I always have stuff in the fridge and I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And then I look up recipes online and they have like 30 other ingredients that I don't have. I'm just like, okay, this
Yeah.
won't work. And that's really smart. I haven't thought of that at all.
Or if you're a plant mom like myself, then taking pictures of your plants and asking what's wrong with it is a very, very helpful tool.
I just assume that my plants don't have what it takes to survive in this fast-paced environment. So
They're just not cut out for it.
exactly. Yeah, half of them are teetering between life and death at like any given moment.
Lovely.
So we're going to talk about uploading photos into AI, and I think that it's like human nature to be curious and want to try new things and participate in what other people are doing. We used to have the Tamagotchis, or we had, you wanted to go with prom with your friends, or you wanted to make friendship bracelets, and now we're experiencing AI, and there's so many AI trends that people want to be a part of just because it's fun. But those trends can introduce some serious privacy risks, and we'll talk about that today. And we're keeping our focus really narrow. So, the privacy risks of uploading your photos to an AI. Can you tell us about some recent trends where people are doing this, like the action doll trend or the Studio Ghibli trend?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of trends. And I think they're very prevalent in, I think, the younger generation. So Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Though I don't think that they're the only ones. I think millennials and anyone who's using Instagram or TikTok
Mm,
is probably at least tempted to participate in some of these trends. I think one that I might even point out is I forget what the name of the trend was, but what your child will look like. You
mm,
could come up with like
yeah.
what you think your future child might look like. That trend, whatever it is. I think there's an action figure trend. There are the starter pack trend. There are a lot of different trends that are very popular, and I think you know this is a very, very popular tool for collecting data. I don't think when you see a trend, you're thinking, oh, what a great data collection method. Usually you're like, I want to know what my Studio Ghibli portrait will look like. And it's completely valid. It's very, like you said, human nature to be curious and want to be part of something. And the trends that make it are the ones that do, in fact, tap into the nostalgia or into, a truly kind of out of the world creativity experience. And I think that what users, when they're uploading their photos, may not be thinking about is, just how drastic that one move is. You think you're getting a really fun output and that it ends there, but it is just the beginning of that large and long and permanent and potentially forever evolving profile of you that lives somewhere or many somewheres in the ether and in certain databases that are for profit, nonprofit, dark market, black market, wherever your data may end up. And it is so hard to track at some point. I think it's also important to realize that a lot of these companies have absolutely no incentive to protect your privacy if they can disclose it upfront to you and otherwise be fine. Meaning, if you're not one of those people who's sitting there reading privacy policies for a living, or just because you like to do that, and I know for a fact that most people don't, and I think this is the lifelong and since its origination issue with privacy policies is no one wants to read them, no matter how easy you make it, no matter features you add to it, no matter how quick and easy the click through process is. It's just onerous for individual users to read it, especially when a lot of the AI apps are embedded in Instagram or other third party applications.
Mhm.
Um, and so the privacy implications of uploading your picture can truly just be unknown. On top of that, and I tell me when to stop because I can keep talking about how bad this is. And I'm also, caveat that by saying, like, it's completely understandable that someone would want to upload their photo, right? Like it's one of those things that at some point all of us are users of social media, and already we are putting so much of our personal data and personal
Mhm.
imagery out there.
I think that, even with the privacy policies, let's say you were to read it and let's say you were to understand it and let's say it didn't conflict with itself, because I've seen so many policies that start off with, we don't sell your data and we would never do that. And then you scroll down and they say that they do. And here's the companies they sell it to. Those policies can change or the company can violate their own policy. I mean, there's so many cases out there and so many enforcement actions where the company said, we are going to do this with your data. And it turns out that's not what they're going to do, or that's not how they're going to share it. And that's not how they're going to sell it. So it's not necessarily, you have to have a trustworthy company behind that policy in addition to having the policy in place too. So let's say I'm curious, I want to try this out. I'm going to upload my photo into an AI. Do the AI tools run like biometrics on your face?
Yeah. Yeah. So AI tools are able to, you know, using, and I'm not the AI technical expert, but from a baseline, it can use whatever its neural network underlyings are to actually run facial geometry, run other kind of analyses from the pictures that you upload, and essentially collect biometric information to identify what it's looking at, whether that's a fingerprint or a face print or any number of those things. It's the same technology that your iPhone uses or what TSA Pre uses when you go to the airport, but now it's so much more accessible and so much more anyone can access and upload using ChatGPT or any number of these AI tools. So it in fact does run biometrics on your face. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what you want it to do, right? When you're partaking in these trends, you want it to be like, well, what do you see? Like, what do I look like? What is my like, you know, twin in like another universe look like,
Yeah, you want it to be an accurate representation of your face. Like you don't necessarily want to upload a photo and then get an image that's like of somebody completely different. But that comes with a lot of privacy risks, right? Like biometrics, you can't, I mean, you can change your email, you can change your phone number. It's a pain in the butt, but you can also change your social security number, but you can't change your face. And
Yeah.
that's the scary part about this is like once your biometrics are out there, that can be used for all different kinds of reasons, like, unlocking your phone, falsely identifying you, or identifying you at different places, like a protest, or, with women at a women's health clinic, all those types of things.
And I think that's the understated part of privacy risks. I think because we live in such a digitally connected world, there's almost like a throw your hands up, we can't control anything. What do we do anyway? Kind of hopelessness even around
Mhm.
privacy responsibility from an individual standpoint. But I think it's really important to know that there are, in fact, companies that are, unicorns that get insane amounts of valuations and funding to collect and aggregate, various data points from various providers to build user profiles, to build human profiles, and to, be able to identify you from publicly, recorded, cameras on the street to things you upload to places where you're in the background somewhere on somebody else's photo, right? So it's important that there's such a huge market incentive to build really strong user profiles. There's so much money to be made in that business. There are so many customers, and they're not individual customers. They're governments, they're mass marketing agencies, they're, without naming any individual companies, but anyone who stands to benefit from ad revenue.
Yeah.
There's so much incentive. And that is why it's so important to be aware of uploading your picture, because biometric data is uniquely one of those things that you can't really change it. If you get a nose job, maybe that changes it a little bit, but even then, you really
Yeah.
can't change your face significantly enough that would make you unidentifiable. It lives on you, it's immutable. And for that reason, you have so little control than you think when you're uploading it.
And you're just, kind of giving this up for free, right? You're not even, I mean, yeah, you're getting like a fun photo in exchange, but that's not really worth it when you think about all these companies that could abuse it. It could end up on the dark web. It could be used to steal your identity. It could be used by authoritarian governments. Like all of these things that could happen with this face print. And even if right now you don't necessarily care, like there's nothing that you're doing that could put you at risk, let's say 10 years from now you join a movement or you join a protest or anything really, and all of a sudden it's a huge problem for you. And you're like, wait, how did they get this print? Well, it turns out you wanted to see what you look like as a baby 10 years ago, even though you have like 1,000 baby pictures of yourself already. It's just, yeah, sometimes it's
Yeah.
just not worth it.
I think you're right. I think being able to, not get stopped at the airport. I think, a large part of the population who are primarily brown experienced this during 9/11 is, that facial profiling when you're crossing through security. Can you imagine even having a lot less predictability when you go to the
Yeah.
airport or any public place where there is security for who knows what reasons, right? And so, or in other countries, here you are getting a visa very benignly, and then now you're on some sort of list. For what? Hard to say because there's no procedure, there's no due process that helps you walk through those things. So the risks are real. And this is not to say we should all live in fear and, but it is a call to be very, very responsible for who you're giving your photos to and whether that immediate gratification of participating in a trend is truly worth it. But that point you made about not getting paid for it, like it's like you're
Mhm.
giving it up for free. I think and like, I don't think you can truly ever get paid enough for things like that.
Yeah.
Um, but like, I'm thinking about this. I don't know if it was like a case or I read somewhere there was a company that was sued by a class action of consumers suing under a privacy. I think it was like in Indiana. I can't remember for biometric data. And the judge granted all of the class members equity over the company.
Interesting.
Yes. And
I
I think
guess why would you want equity in a company that just violated your privacy rights? I've seen those before where there's like class action
A
lawsuits, it's a
multi.
multi-billion-dollar settlement, and then each class member gets like 25 bucks. And it's like, what am I supposed to do with
I've
this?
definitely been part of those and I've cashed many a check for like $10.
But it's like, your privacy was violated. All your data ended up on the dark web. You had to switch all your credit cards. You had to change all these accounts. You had to change all your passwords. And then at the end of the day, you get $25 for it. And it's like, I mean, who's this for? Right? Like, was this really compensation of the amount of time that it takes consumers to like perform all these actions because of the data
Yeah.
breach that you people caused? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I mean, 100% agree. Although if it does dilute the equity of a company, I do think at least out here in Silicon Valley, the most coveted
Yeah.
currency is equity. And I think it was like some like 30% of the company's equity went to consumers.
Wow.
That's pretty significant,
Wow.
I'd say.
Yeah,
Um,
that's not a bad deal. Yeah,
it's not
I
a
would
bad
take
deal. So
that.
it's per consumer, maybe it's not like significant, but if I forget how many people were in that class, but I say for the company, it's crippling, right? And I
Yeah,
think perhaps that was kind of the goal there is to a
yeah.
bit of a punishment in
That's a good
disguise.
one. Yeah, that's a new one for sure. You don't see that.
I think the company
Very
was
good.
called Clearview AI. Clearview AI.
Oh, interesting. Okay, we know
Yeah,
we know
worth
those.
looking into.
Yeah, we know those people. So in addition to getting like biometrics and things like that, would the AI also receive metadata? And what does that metadata expose?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Lots and lots of metadata. I think pull up any picture on your iPhone. I'm assuming majority of the listeners are iPhone users, but any Android phone as well. You kind of look at the info button on your photo, you start to see time, date, location, all this other stuff that I don't understand. You can leave notes on that photo. You can share and give access to other people on your phone to that photo. There are, it can tell you if your photo was taken in a live mode, it can have a number of photos within that one photo file. And so each photo has a lot of metadata. And I think you can turn those features off on your phone or whatever device you're using, but it's really important because metadata is basically other information attached to your picture outside of the image itself that gives away additional information about who you are. This could also include what kind of phone you used, your address, your GPS coordinates, and this just continues building your user profile out there somewhere along with what you look like. So now not only do they know what you look like, but they know what kind of phone you have. They know what time of the day you tend to take these photos. They know where you are when you're taking them. And that is a lot of information to be uploading for a trend.
Yeah.
That's,
I mean,
yeah.
you could, yeah. I feel like you could also build like quite a profile about a person if they upload a lot of pictures. Let's say they upload like multiple pictures from their workplace, where they work, or maybe upload pictures from their church. So, their religion. The thing that really scares me about that, the metadata, is the idea that like I'm just over there in a street and I take some picture, somebody obtains that metadata and there's like a crime committed in the area, and all of a sudden I'm like caught up in some criminal investigation even though I had nothing what to do with it, but the metadata showed that I was in like similar vicinity around that time. That
Yeah.
part really freaks me out.
I think, yeah, it's very freaky. I also think it's really scary to be able to build a profile about you in your associations. Like
Mhm.
all you did was upload pictures. Maybe you're one of those very cautious folks who doesn't put like too much information about what schools you went to or where you work on the internet because you don't want to be identified in any way. But then you have a share picture and
Yeah.
you just happen to be on campus. So, or you happen to be coming away from work over and over, and a number of your photos show what your associations are at this point. Now you have such a more, there's a richer version of you that lives on the
Mhm.
internet for
Yeah.
someone to understand. And the use cases you can get creative with, right? You can get very, very creative at the most benign level. I'd say maybe now, like I don't know, a consumer product company's like, well, we really, really want to sell, I don't know, these really cool like self-heating water bottles to people who live in cold climates who, have a big commute. Great. I'm sure they can figure out that XYZ person tends to take a picture from this bridge a lot while they're on a drive potentially. So they must have it, right? And that's benign, right? Now they're just going to target you with this cool ad for a self-heating cup, but it could get worse, right? As you said, it could be part of a criminal investigation, or if you took a picture at a church or some sort of group and you happen to be in a jurisdiction where certain protections are not afforded to folks like yourself,
Mhm.
now you're in real serious trouble. So, yeah,
Yeah.
no, the risks are real.
Absolutely. Or maybe you are in a jurisdiction that does afford those protections, but then you travel to one that doesn't. Or you want to
Mm,
move to one that, just happens not to offer that. I mean, I've also heard of people, this data could end up on the dark web and could be used to make deep fakes or pornographic
yeah,
images of you with your face on with zero consent or zero knowledge from you. All of a sudden your
100%.
face is on all these websites doing things that you yourself would never do, or at least not do in public. And there's not much you can do about that.
And I think we misunderstand the severity of that, what you just mentioned, the deep fakes and the
Mhm.
potential, because, I think there are a lot of great companies that are coming out that are working on exactly identifying fake images and fake, there is an interest and market incentive, if you would, for that kind of data and for that kind of technology to exist. And yet, once something like that's linked to you, whether or not it ultimately turns out to be fake or real or anything like that, there's an emotional toll that you're dealing
Mhm.
with. There's an emotional and social toll that you're going to be dealing with. And I think we underestimate because we're lawyers. This is a legal conversation to some degree, but I think there's a human element here that goes on beyond the legal repercussions that something can have, including reputational. So when you do apply for a job and all they can find is a deep fake of a pornographic video or pictures, or perhaps very compromising politically sensitive things,
Mhm.
um, you're that's a very tough one to walk back from.
Yeah, and imagine explaining that to your family and your grandparents or your parents who are maybe older and don't understand this technology of like, hey, this is fake, I swear, and yeah, there's no better way for people to think it's real than to say it's fake. And that can
100%.
be really, really bad. It's again in exchange for a picture of seeing what you look like as a baby or seeing what your twin would look like or whatever, it's just yeah, sometimes it might not be worth it. You did mention previously the privacy policies of these AI companies, and we talked about, how the company itself needs to be trustworthy for you to be able to trust the privacy policy. But some of these like more famous AI tools, do they say that they're going to sell this data? Do they say they're going to share this data? Like what do their policies say about this?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies say that they're not going to sell this data unless you opt into that. So there's a lot of opt in abilities. I think that there's a lot of companies that also, I think I'm trying to remember what OpenAI's policy versus like Anthropic, those are the two main ones, maybe Perplexity. But each of these companies do not make it clear and are not out there to say we won't. This is a very case by case thing. Certain tools and certain GPTs, for example, on ChatGPT, may expose you to your data being sold and trained upon. Other GPTs won't. And so there are a lot of carve outs within privacy policies themselves that you do need to be very careful and read very line by line as to what they're promising. A lot of the privacy policies forget resale. I think I think sale of privacy data is very concerning, and that's a very obvious like kind of low hanging fruit to identify as a risk.
Mhm.
But I think that there are kind of certain embedded risks that perhaps you might, as a user, not be really thinking about, which is storage and kind of the reuse of certain data. And then, of course, training those models. And I think the training those models piece for me is what really sticks out as equivalent to selling my data, largely because now there's in no way can you remove that data ever again, right? It's now within the LLM. It's being trained upon other data is being created using my personal data. And that's something that those companies don't promise that they won't do, the major companies. I think OpenAI says that you can opt out or opt in. I can't remember exactly but there is a feature where you are able to say, don't use my data to train your LLMs. But the whole reason why GPT and Claude and all these things are available for free is for them to collect data
Yeah.
and then for you to pay, of course, for more premium features. But it's really about getting enough information.
Yeah.
Um,
To me, like training the AI is almost like your data is now part of the public domain.
yeah,
That's how I
I
look
know.
at it. Yeah.
Yeah. And like for better or worse, right? You can argue that it shouldn't be that way. I agree, but it is. It's something that it's just nearly impossible to extract back out once it's out there.
Mhm.
And it kind of reminds me of the right to be forgotten and the European Union's kind of attempt at being able to delete your personal data. I just don't know how that's going to look now, especially if certain data is being trained upon. So you take down a picture from Facebook, but what if an LLM has already been trained on it? Then what,
Yep.
right? And those are
Yeah.
the kinds of the questions that haven't been answered yet, which makes it up for it creates risk.
I think I saw there were a couple cases where they made the AI company delete the entire training data set because
Oh,
there's
wow.
some like PII in it that somebody wanted removed and they didn't remove it. And the person filed a complaint and they're just like, okay, you have to delete your entire training set now. And there's, yeah, but it's pretty wild. I mean, there's also instances where, you go into OpenAI and it tells you you're working with an AI, but it doesn't necessarily explain what's happening or if your data is part of a training set or what that means. There's also, instances with like the Facebook AI where people were interacting with it. They got a prompt saying all the stuff you're going to put into this AI is going to go public. Like it's going to be posted on this public forum. And they continued proceeding and then asked questions that you wouldn't ask if you understood that this information was going to become public, like how to cheat on a test or like, very, very private things. And I think that even when that notice is in place, a lot of consumers just see that box, are so used to clicking OK or clicking X out of those boxes, they don't necessarily even read it. So, I mean, even if you're trying to tell people it's going to become public, sometimes that doesn't even work. So it's a really tough problem with how to make
Yeah.
people, give them the right information, make them pay attention versus, not say anything and just collect this data, which you're financially incentivized to do that.
Well, and I think that what you mentioned around, consumers kind of glazing their eyes over
Mhm.
any given privacy notice or risk notice, it's in some ways it's exactly what you'd want to happen if you were a company. And this is
Yeah.
not to malign any companies, because a lot of startup founders, for example, that I work with, really don't want to fall into the privacy issue. They really, really want to do the right thing when they're building their AI products. But it is one of those places where you're like, how do we get people to really understand what they're doing here? Like,
Yeah.
how do you tell someone, like, please don't tell us how old you are, like what color your eyes are? I don't want to know the members of your family. Like, but
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
how can you, don't give me your address. Like, none of these things are important to the product that you're about to use, and yet people want to share and they want to access the richness of certain products. So it is very difficult. And the other thing that kind of, what you were saying around kind of the risks that these tools tend to run, and having to delete entire training sets, I think that's fantastic, because that risk is going to create, as my job is to kind of think about, like, what can we predict about the market around AI for the next 5, 10 years. You're going to see, I mean, if it is true that it takes so many resources, energy, and data collection in order to build really strong and accurate LLMs, and then by contamination of having PII, you have to now, by law, because courts demand it, have to delete. There's even a risk that you might have to delete all of that. It is so
Yeah.
costly that now there is an incentive to ensure, at least by those companies who don't want to face this outcome, to make sure that PII is truly, truly scrapped. And if it is not doable right now, then there's a huge opportunity for innovation to be
Yeah.
creating data sets that can be truly scrubbed. So I think there's a little bit of hope, I think, given just how powerful AI is as a technology, to me, perhaps build in a way that you can actually achieve total privacy. Maybe this is
Yeah.
me being hopeful.
Well, I hope so too. That'd be nice. So we could use more of these tools because they are, extremely helpful. What tips would you give to consumers who want to use AI, but who also want to protect their privacy?
Yeah, and I think I'm going to sound like beating an old horse dead, but there's, pause before you upload anything. Make sure, especially if it's a photo, make sure that the metadata is scrubbed. You can do that on a number of ways. That's the first point, just taking a moment before and just thinking about what you're doing. I think there's a mindfulness element to using AI tools, and honestly using social media generally,
Mhm.
because those tools make it so easy to upload and share and engage. Then that brings me to my second point, is to actually understand the platform that you're using. If you're doing this likely on social media, understand that the incentive here the things that are pushing you to do what you're about to do are truly in order to get your data. There is no other incentive. It is not about building community. It is not about building connection. The
Right.
only goal of a trend is to collect data. And I wouldn't have said that before, but I say that now because it is the only incentive of a tool like Instagram or TikTok is usage, engagement,
Yeah.
collection.
Yeah, it's funny because so many of those tools, they're ads or whatever, or posters, let's build a community, let's share our interests, and we're all interested in knitting and so fun, and we're all going to get together. And but in reality, you don't need Instagram for doing any of that. You can meet with your friends in your knitting circle or whatever. Like, it doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to mean
Yeah.
that you're giving up all this data in exchange.
And I think that's why I point out the social media component over what I just mentioned. Like I use Slack and they have AI tools. The difference here is that social media is kind of like the engine on steroids designed to collect data. That is a known incentive of social media companies. That is literally what they exist for.
Mhm.
And so if that's where you're accessing AI tools, and that is likely where you are using biometric related AI tools, that's where I say pause very much, breathe, and take a moment before you upload
Yeah.
additional information.
Do you have any like favorite resources for privacy attorneys to learn more about AI? Because I know we're getting more and more of those questions every day.
I could say there are podcasts and all these things, and yes, there are, but one of the places that I found one of the books that I read that I found really illuminating was The Alignment Problem. And that's an incredible book. I recommend it to anyone who's trying to understand both the technology and kind of the issues with the technology in a way that's both constructive and understandable. The book is really good at helping you understand what the back end of AI really is and how it came to be. And I think as attorneys, we shy away so much from technical. And I'm no different. I get it. Same. That's why I joined the law rather than be an engineer. But I think if there was ever a time where we should know how certain technologies work, whether or not you practice tech, law, privacy, business, or anything, it's now, because now this implicates all of us, and it also is going to be used in reasoning, legal reasoning, judicial reasoning, prediction. So I just could not recommend that book more. It's called The Alignment Problem, and if I cannot remember the author, but the title speaks for itself.
Awesome. Thank you. Any final thoughts before we kind of conclude here?
Yeah, I mean, final thoughts are, one, I just absolutely love that these are questions that are being asked right now. I think I have a lot of hope. I always end most of my conversations on a hopeful note, which is usually rare on AI related topics. But I have a lot of hope that as much as there are risks to privacy in the world of I think there's a lot of money, market incentive, and need for privacy innovation. And there could not be a better tool and technology to help us achieve that than AI. So I feel very, very hopeful about that.
Awesome. Yeah, I hope so too. I hope we can get some legislation. I hope we can get some rules. I hope that companies follow those rules. And if they don't, I hope that people are playing it safe with these tools too.
Or just anticipating being part owners of majority of the AI companies out there.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the conversation. And for anybody listening, definitely make sure to subscribe to Privacy Laws so you don't miss our next episode.